The house had learned Evelyn Carter's footsteps long ago. It recognized the soft rhythm of her movement in the early mornings, the careful way her slippers brushed against the wooden floor. Never hurried, never heavy. The house had aged with her, just as quietly. The paint along the hallway had faded unevenly from years of sun, slipping in through lace curtains. The door hinges sighed instead of creaked. Even the air inside seemed slower, gentler, as if it had adjusted itself to Evelyn's way of being in the world. She rose before dawn most days, not because she needed to, but because her body no longer slept deeply. Grief had done that to her years ago, hollowing out her nights and teaching her mornings to arrive early. Still, she welcomed the quiet before the neighborhood stirred. It was the only time the world felt fully hers. Evelyn was 62, though people often guessed younger. Not because time had been kind, but because she carried it lightly. Her hair, once thick and black, was now threaded with silver that she no longer bothered to dye. Her face bore lines, but none of them were sharp. They curved gently, shaped by decades of patience rather than bitterness. She lived in a modest one-story home on a street where everyone knew everyone else, even if they didn't talk much anymore. A southern town that had never quite grown into a city and never tried to. The kind of place where porches still mattered, where neighbors waved even if they didn't stop, where Sundays moved slower than the rest of the week. Evelyn had lived here almost her entire adult life. She had raised her family here. She had buried her husband here. Her mornings followed the same pattern. Coffee first, always black, always from the same chipped mug she'd owned since her 30s. She stood at the kitchen counter while it brewed, one hand resting lightly against the edge, the other holding the Bible she read every morning. Not for long, just a few verses, enough to steady her, enough to remind her that life did not belong entirely to her worries. She did not pray loudly. She did not kneel or clasp her hands tightly. Her prayers were quiet conversations, whispered more with her breath than her voice. They were not full of demands or even requests anymore. Mostly, they were acknowledgments. Thank you for another morning. Please watch over him. Help me trust what I cannot fix. Him was Marcus. Marcus Carter had once filled this house with noise, laughter that bounced down the hallway, music turned too loud in his bedroom, footsteps that ran instead of walked, doors that slammed, not out of anger but energy. Now, when Marcus came home, the house went still. Evelyn heard his presence differently. The heavier step on the porch, the pause before the door opened, the careful way he moved through rooms, as if he didn't quite belong in them anymore. Marcus was 28, tall like his father, with the same broad shoulders and deep-set eyes. He had Evelyn's mouth though, the shape of it, the way it curved naturally downward when he was thinking. It gave him a serious look, even when he wasn't trying to be serious at all. He had not always been distant. There was a time when he talked to her about everything, about school, about his friends, about the things he wanted to do with his life. He used to sit at the same kitchen table and tell her stories while she cooked, his voice full of certainty, of belief in the future. Those conversations felt like another lifetime now. Marcus didn't live with Evelyn full-time, not anymore. He drifted in and out of her home the way he drifted through everything else these days. Sometimes he stayed a week, sometimes a month. Sometimes he disappeared for long stretches without much explanation. He always came back eventually. He always needed something eventually. A place to rest. A place that didn't ask too many questions. Evelyn never refused him. She never told him how long he could stay. Never reminded him of his age. Never asked why things hadn't worked out yet. She had learned slowly and painfully that love did not grow louder just because fear did. This morning, Marcus was asleep in the old bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that had once been covered in posters and clutter and teenage ambition. Now it was mostly bare. A bed, a dresser, a folded blanket at the foot that Evelyn had placed there quietly, without telling him. She moved around the kitchen with careful intention, mindful of the sounds she made. She set a pan on the stove, cracked eggs gently, let the coffee finish brewing before pouring it. The radio stayed off. Silence felt kinder. From the hallway, she could hear Marcus's breathing through the thin walls. It was uneven, restless. Even asleep, he did not seem at ease. Evelyn carried her mug to the small kitchen table and sat down. The chair creaked softly beneath her weight. She rested her hands around the warm ceramic and closed her eyes for a moment. She did not think about the past right away. She had learned better than that. Mornings were not for regret. They were for steadiness, for beginning again, even if the beginning looked the same as yesterday. She thought instead about the small things, the way the sunlight would reach the living room by mid-morning, the tomatoes she needed to check in the garden later, the laundry she would fold in the afternoon. Ordinary thoughts, anchoring thoughts. Still, Marcus lived in the space behind all of them, like a quiet hum she could never quite escape. When her husband Samuel Carter had died 8 years earlier, the house had been loud with grief. Friends and family filled every room. People cooked and cleaned and prayed and cried. Marcus had been there every moment, steady and present, his arm around her shoulders when her knees gave out, his voice firm when hers disappeared. Evelyn had leaned on him then, more than she realized at the time. Something had shifted after that, slowly, almost imperceptibly. Marcus had stayed strong for a while, carrying responsibilities that were not his to carry. He had taken care of her, even when she hadn't asked him to. But strength, when held too tightly, eventually bends. Evelyn had seen it happen, but she had not known how to stop it. Now, years later, she wondered sometimes if that was where the distance had begun, not with rebellion or anger, but with exhaustion, with the quiet realization that the world did not always reward effort the way it promised to. The bedroom bedroom door at the end of the hall creaked open. Evelyn opened her eyes. Marcus stood there, framed by the doorway, rubbing his face with both hands. His hair was slightly longer than usual, unkempt in a way that suggested neglect rather than style. He wore an old t-shirt and jeans. His shoulders slumped forward as if the day already weighed on him. "Morning, Ma," he said, his voice rough from sleep. "Morning," Evelyn replied, her tone warm but unassuming. "Coffee's fresh." He nodded and walked into the kitchen, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down heavily. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not awkward, but it was careful, as if both were aware of how easily the wrong words could bruise something fragile. Marcus poured himself coffee, adding sugar but no cream. He stared into the mug as if he expected answers to rise from it. Evelyn watched him without staring. She had perfected that over the years, being present without pressing, seeing without demanding acknowledgement. "You sleep all right?" she asked gently. He shrugged. "Yeah, I guess." She did not ask more. They ate quietly when the eggs were ready. Marcus thanked her, as he always did, polite, grateful, distant. After breakfast, he lingered at the table longer than usual, scrolling through his phone without much interest. Evelyn rinsed the dishes and set them in the drying rack. She moved slowly, giving him space, letting him choose when to speak. Finally, he stood up. "I'm gonna head out for a bit." "All right," she said. "Be safe." He paused as if he might say something else. Then he nodded and grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Evelyn stood still for a moment, her hands resting on the counter. She exhaled slowly. She did not chase him. She did not ask where he was going or when he would be back. She had learned that love sometimes looked like restraint. She picked up her Bible again and sat back down at the table. Her faith was not loud or dramatic. It did not promise miracles or instant change. It was quiet and worn, shaped by years of unanswered questions and small mercies. It had survived the death of a husband. It had survived disappointments that came wrapped in the face of her own child. Evelyn believed in showing up and staying, in trusting that seeds planted quietly still grew, even when she could not see them. She turned a page and read slowly, letting the words settle. Outside, the neighborhood began to wake. Cars passed. A dog barked. Somewhere down the street, a screen door slammed. Life moved forward as it always did. And Evelyn, in her quiet kitchen, held hope the way she always had, gently, without forcing it into shape. Marcus had not always been this way. Evelyn remembered that truth with a kind of careful tenderness, the way one handled fragile things. She did not cling to the memory, but she did not push it away either. It lived in her quietly, alongside everything else. There was a time when Marcus moved through the world with ease. Not arrogance, not loud confidence, but a steady belief that effort mattered. That showing up would be enough. He had been a thoughtful boy, observant even as a child, the kind who noticed when Evelyn was tired and offered to carry groceries without being asked, the kind who stayed close without clinging. As a teenager, he had been full of promise. Teachers spoke of him with approval. Coaches respected him. Neighbors commented on his manners, his calm nature, the way he listened more than he spoke. Evelyn had taken pride in that. Though she never bragged, she thanked God quietly instead, believing that good character was borrowed, not owned. She remembered evenings when Marcus would sit at the kitchen table, books spread out in front of him, tapping his pencil against the wood while thinking through a problem. Samuel would sit nearby, reading the paper or fixing something that didn't really need fixing, offering the occasional word of advice without hovering. It had been a good balance, a solid home. Back then, Marcus talked about the future like it was a place he could reach simply by walking toward college, a career, a life that made sense. He did not rush. He did not rebel. He trusted the process. The change had not come suddenly. Evelyn could not point to a single argument, a single mistake, a single bad influence. It was more like watching the tide pull away from shore, slow, quiet, almost polite. It started with small shifts, Marcus staying out later than usual, his laughter losing some of its lightness, his answers becoming shorter. He was still respectful, still kind, but less present. Evelyn had noticed, of course. Mothers always did, but she had told herself it was normal. Young men needed space. They needed to test themselves. Samuel had said the same, brushing it off with a smile. "He's figuring things out," he'd said. We all did. Then Samuel got sick. The illness arrived without warning, turning their steady life fragile almost overnight. Doctor visits replaced dinners out. Quiet worry replaced easy conversation. Marcus had stepped in without hesitation, taking on responsibilities that did not belong to him, driving Evelyn to appointments, handling bills, sitting beside Samuel late into the night when the pain would not let him sleep. Evelyn had watched her son grow older in those months. Not stronger, exactly. Heavier. When Samuel died, something in Marcus closed, not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else noticed, but Evelyn felt it. The way one felt a room grow colder, even when the thermostat hadn't changed. After the funeral, after the casserole stopped coming and the house emptied, Marcus stayed. He helped Evelyn through her grief, steady and quiet, but he did not speak much about his own. She wondered now if that was when the drift truly began, when Marcus learned that being strong meant being silent, when the weight of adulthood arrived too early and stayed too long. In the years that followed, Marcus tried to move forward. He enrolled in community college, then dropped classes quietly without explanation. He took jobs that never seemed to last, not because he failed at them, but because something always felt off. Too small, too unstable, too temporary. Evelyn asked gentle questions then, not accusing, just curious. "Are you happy there? Does it feel right to you? What do you want next?" Marcus answered politely, vaguely. He did not invite her into his uncertainty. certainty. He did not ask for advice. At first, Evelyn worried she had said too much. Then she worried she had said too little. Now, years later, she sat alone in the living room one afternoon, sunlight pooling softly across the carpet, remembering all of it with a kind of tired clarity. Marcus had been gone since morning. She did not know where he was. She resisted the urge to imagine worst-case scenarios. Fear, she had learned, could easily become its own kind of sin if left unchecked. She folded laundry slowly, smoothing each item carefully, as if order in small things might bring order to larger ones. Her faith had changed over the years. Once, her prayers had been specific, direct. She had prayed for Marcus's success, for clear direction, for opportunities that made sense. She had prayed for him to choose wisely, to stay safe, to stay close. As time passed without clear answers, her prayers softened, not weaker, just different. Less about outcomes, more about endurance. She prayed for patience, for wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. For trust, not only in God, but in Marcus himself. She believed deeply that control was not love, that pushing could drive someone further away, that sometimes faith meant stepping back and allowing space for a person to stumble, even when it hurt to watch. Still, the strain between her values and Marcus's choices lived quietly between them. Evelyn had grown up believing in structure, in steady work, in commitments honored even when they grew heavy. She had married young, built a life slowly, stayed when leaving might have been easier. Her faith had been shaped by consistency, by showing up day after day without fanfare. Marcus lived differently now. His life lacked rhythm. He moved from place to place, job to job, never settling long enough to build anything solid. Evelyn did not judge him for that. She judged herself instead, wondering if she had failed to prepare him for the waiting, for the dull stretches where faith mattered more than excitement. Sometimes late at night, she allowed herself to grieve the son she thought she would have by now. Not a different son, just an older version of the one she remembered, settled, grounded, at peace. She never let Marcus see that grief. When he came home that evening, it was already dark. The porch light clicked on automatically as he stepped up to the door. Evelyn heard it from the kitchen and felt a familiar mix of relief and concern settle into her chest. He entered quietly, hanging his jacket in the same place every time. He looked tired, more than usual. "Hey, Ma," he said softly. "Hey," she replied. "I kept some dinner warm if you're hungry." He hesitated. "Yeah, that'd be good." They sat at the table again, the same careful distance between them. Evelyn noticed the way Marcus ate slowly, distracted, as if his mind were elsewhere. She did not ask questions, not yet. After a few minutes, she spoke. "I was thinking about your dad today." Marcus looked up, surprised. "Yeah? Mm-hmm. He would have liked this weather, said it made everything feel possible." Marcus smiled faintly. "Sounds like him?" They shared a quiet moment, a memory settling gently between them. Evelyn watched Marcus closely then, not for signs of trouble, but for openings. He seemed softer when his father was mentioned, less guarded. It made her heart ache in a way she did not fully understand. "You've been carrying a lot for a long time," she said carefully. Marcus stiffened slightly. "I'm all right," she nodded. "I know. I just wanted you to know you don't have to carry it all alone." He did not respond right away. His gaze dropped back to his plate. Evelyn resisted the urge to fill the silence. Finally, he said, "I'm trying. Ma, I really am." She reached across the table and rested her hand near his. Not touching, just close enough to be felt. "I know," she said, and she meant it. That night, after Marcus went to bed, Evelyn knelt beside her bed for the first time in years. Not because she believed kneeling made her prayers stronger, but because she felt tired in a way that sitting did not ease. She prayed quietly, her voice barely more than breath. "Help me be patient. Help me be wise. Help me trust what I cannot see." She did not ask for Marcus to change. She asked for herself to endure. Faith, she had learned, was not about certainty. It was about staying open, even when the answers arrived slowly. Outside, the town slept. Inside, Evelyn held on to hope, not the loud kind that demanded proof, but the quiet kind that waited. Not in any predictable way, not with announcements or explanations. He would arrive late in the evening, sometimes just after sunset, sometimes well past midnight. His presence known first by the soft click of the porch light and then by the careful opening of the front door. He moved quietly through the house, as if afraid of waking something fragile. Though Evelyn was almost always awake anyway, she noticed the pattern before she understood it. The longer stays. The way his bag stayed by the door for days instead of hours. The way he lingered in the kitchen after meals, standing with his hands resting on the counter, staring out the window, as if waiting for something to reveal itself. Evelyn did not comment on the change. She had learned that naming things too quickly could make them disappear. Instead, she adjusted herself to his presence the way she always had. She bought a little more food, folded his laundry without asking, left the hall light on at night, just enough to soften the dark. Marcus remained emotionally guarded. He spoke when spoken to. He answered questions politely. He thanked her for meals, for rides, for small kindnesses. But he did not volunteer much about where he had been or what weighed on him. His words stayed on the surface, careful and contained. Evelyn sensed something underneath, something unsettled. It lived in the way he paced the living room late at night, phone in hand, reading messages that made his jaw tighten. In the way he sat at the table long after eating, elbows resting on the wood, head lowered slightly as if the room itself were asking too much of him. The tension between them was quiet, almost invisible. There were no arguments, no raised voices, no accusations, but it lived in the pauses, in the things unsaid, in the way Evelyn sometimes caught herself watching him too closely and had to look away. She struggled with that watching. Fear crept in slowly, disguising itself as concern. She worried about the people Marcus spent time with, though she did not know their names. She worried about money, about stability, about the way his life seemed to move sideways instead of forward. She worried that one day he would stop coming home altogether. At the same time, she feared pushing him away by holding on too tightly. Every instinct in her wanted to ask more, to press gently but firmly, to sit him down and demand honesty, clarity, a plan. She imagined the conversation sometimes late at night, rehearsing calm words that would not sound like judgment. But when morning came, she always chose silence, not because she didn't care, because she cared too much to risk breaking what little closeness remained. Their conversation stayed polite and careful. How was your day? All right, you working tomorrow? Maybe. Sometimes Marcus asked about her garden, about church, about neighbors they both knew. Small talk that kept them connected without exposing anything tender. Evelyn answered willingly, grateful for even that. She spoke about the tomatoes coming in late this year, about Mrs. Franklin down the street finally selling her house, about the new pastor who spoke softly and didn't rush his sermons. Marcus listened, nodding occasionally, his attention drifting in and out. One afternoon, Evelyn found him sitting on the front steps, elbows on his knees, staring down the street. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the quiet road. He looked smaller somehow, folded inward despite his size. She sat beside him without speaking. They watched the neighborhood together. A child rode by on a bicycle, wobbling slightly before finding balance. A car passed slowly, music playing low through open windows. Somewhere, a lawnmower hummed. After a while, Marcus spoke. You ever feel like you're supposed to be somewhere else, but you don't know where that is? Evelyn turned her head slightly to look at him. She chose her words carefully. I think a lot of people feel that way. He nodded. Feels like I missed something, like everyone else got a map. She did not tell him that life rarely came with maps. She did not tell him that confusion was not failure. She simply said, it takes time to find your footing. Marcus exhaled slowly. Feels like I've been waiting a long time. Evelyn felt something tighten in her chest. She wanted to say she knew, that she had waited too, that she was still waiting in her own way. But she also knew that this moment was fragile, easily broken by too much meaning. So she said, you're not behind. He did not respond, but he did not pull away either. That night, Evelyn lay awake longer than usual. Her thoughts moved in slow circles, never settling. She wondered how much of Marcus's struggle was hers to carry and how much she needed to release. Trust was not easy. Trust meant believing that Marcus would find his way, even if she could not guide him there. It meant accepting that pain might be part of his path, that mistakes were not something she could pray away entirely. Fear whispered differently. Fear told her to intervene, to control, to protect at all costs. Fear painted images she tried hard not to imagine. Evelyn knew the difference between faith and fear, but knowing did not make choosing easier. The next morning, Marcus left early without waking her. She found the coffee pot empty and his jacket missing. A note lay on the counter, brief and unevenly written. Went to take care of something. I'll be back later. She folded the note and placed it in the drawer where she kept old birthday cards and receipts. She did not read into it more than necessary. Her day unfolded quietly. Church errands, a visit to the grocery store, a short conversation with a neighbor who asked casually how Marcus was doing. He's all right, Evelyn replied, because it was the closest thing to truth she could offer. By evening, the tension returned, subtle but persistent. Marcus had not come home. The sky darkened slowly, the way it always did in summer, stretching daylight thin before finally letting it go. Evelyn fixed dinner anyway. She ate alone, leaving a plate covered in foil on the stove. She resisted checking the clock too often. When Marcus finally returned, it was nearly 10. He looked worn down, his shoulders heavier than when he'd left. You okay? Evelyn asked gently. Yeah, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She nodded. Food's on the stove. He hesitated, then said, thanks. They sat together again, the familiar quiet between them, but something felt different, thicker, more weighted. Evelyn sensed that Marcus was standing near the edge of something. Not a crisis, not yet, but a threshold. She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the space, to say something that would invite honesty without demanding it. Instead, she trusted silence again. Later that night, she prayed longer than usual, not with desperation, with steadiness. Help me not rush what needs time. Help me love without fear. Help me trust you with what I cannot hold. In the room at the end of the hall, Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house. The quiet did not comfort him the way it once had, but it did not drive him away either. Between them, unspoken and unresolved, something waited. The changes in Marcus's life did not arrive with drama. There were no sudden phone calls in the middle of the night, no police at the door, no public embarrassment or sharp breaks that demanded attention. What unfolded instead came quietly, the way most real trouble did, layered, ordinary, easy to explain away if one wanted to. Marcus began leaving earlier in the mornings and returning later at night. Sometimes he came home smelling faintly of smoke and unfamiliar cologne. Sometimes his phone buzzed constantly during dinner. Messages Messages he read but did not answer until he stepped outside. Evelyn noticed always. She noticed everything, but she learned to notice without reacting. He talked about work in fragments, a warehouse job that paid cash, a short-term contract that didn't require references, people who promised opportunities but never quite followed through. The details never added up, but they didn't fall apart either. They existed in that uneasy space where truth and evasion lived side by side. Evelyn listened without interrupting, without challenging. She had learned that questions could feel like accusations when someone already felt cornered by their own life. Still, concern settled into her body in quiet ways, a tightness behind the eyes, a heaviness in the chest that arrived without warning. She carried it with her through the day, through grocery aisles and church pews and garden rows, never setting it down completely. The friendships Marcus spoke of were new and vaguely defined. Names that came and went, people Evelyn never met. She pictured them without faces, shadows rather than individuals, and reminded herself that imagination could be more dangerous than reality. Once, while folding laundry, she found a receipt in Marcus's pocket for something he could not afford. Another time, she noticed bruising along his knuckles, faint but visible. When she asked about it, he shrugged and said he'd caught his hand on a door. She nodded and let it go. Each small sign tugged at her instinct to protect, to step in, to draw a line and demand safety. She had been a mother long enough to know that silence was not always wisdom, but she also knew that control could harden into something ugly if it came from fear instead of love. The conflict lived inside her, heavy and unresolved. At church, Evelyn sat in her usual place near the middle, hands folded loosely in her lap, listening as the pastor spoke about surrender, about releasing what could not be fixed by force. The words felt personal, uncomfortably precise. She did not bow her head in agreement. She simply absorbed them. After the service, a woman she had known for years leaned in and asked softly, "How's Marcus doing?" Evelyn smiled gently. "He's finding his way." The answer tasted incomplete, but it was honest enough. At home, Marcus moved through the house like a guest. Respectful, careful. He cleaned up after himself, fixed small things without being asked. He never raised his voice or slammed doors. If Evelyn hadn't been watching closely, she might have believed everything was fine, but she felt the distance growing, not outward but inward. Marcus was retreating into himself, carrying burdens he did not name. One evening, as Evelyn prepared dinner, Marcus hovered near the doorway, restless. He paced once, then stopped. "Ma," he said. She turned, her heart lifting slightly at the sound of his voice breaking the routine. "Yes?" He hesitated. "You ever regret staying?" The question caught her off guard. "Staying where?" she asked gently. "Here. This town. This life." Evelyn considered carefully. "No," she said after a moment. "Not really?" Marcus frowned. "You never wonder what could have been?" She wiped her hands on a towel. "I wonder sometimes, but wondering isn't the same as regretting." He nodded slowly, as if turning the thought over in his mind. "I feel stuck," he admitted quietly. Evelyn felt the weight of the words settle between them. She resisted the urge to reassure him too quickly. Instead, she said, "Being still isn't the same as being stuck." Marcus looked unconvinced. "Feels the same." She met his gaze. "Feelings don't always tell the whole story." He did not argue. He simply nodded and stepped back, the moment closing as gently as it had opened. That night, Evelyn lay awake again, the familiar pattern returning. She thought about the line between guidance and interference, about how easily love could turn into pressure. Her faith, once rooted in certainty, had softened into something quieter, acceptance perhaps, or humility. She prayed not for Marcus to change, but for clarity in her own heart. "Show me when to step forward. Show me when to step back. Help me love him as he is, not as I wish him to be." Days passed. Weeks blended together. Marcus's work became more unstable. He spoke of delays in payment, of misunderstandings, of plans that fell through. Evelyn listened and offered what she could. Meals, space, steady presence, without offering solutions he hadn't asked for. Inside, anxiety pressed against her ribs. One afternoon, she found Marcus sitting at the kitchen table, head in his hands, shoulders shaking slightly. The sight stopped her cold. She approached slowly. "Marcus?" He looked up quickly, wiping his face. "I'm fine." She did not believe him, but she did not say so. She pulled out the chair beside him and sat down. They sat together in silence, the weight of the moment settling gradually. "I messed up," he said finally. Evelyn waited. "Not bad," he added quickly. "Just wrong people, wrong moves." Her instinct screamed to ask for details, to assess danger, to intervene. Instead, she asked, "Do you feel safe?" He hesitated. "Yeah, I think so." That was enough for now. "I'm here," she said simply. Marcus nodded, his eyes fixed on the table. In that moment, Evelyn understood something she had been circling for years. Her role was not to shield Marcus from consequences. It was to remain present while he faced them. Faith, she realized, was not passive. It was active restraint, the discipline of not interfering when interference would only delay growth. That understanding did not bring peace immediately. It brought grief. The grief of letting go of control. The grief of accepting uncertainty. But beneath the grief, something steadier waited. Evelyn rose early the next morning and tended her garden, hands deep in soil, grounding herself in small living things. She reminded herself that growth happened underground long before it showed above the surface. Inside the house, Marcus slept late, worn down by his own choices and their weight. Neither knew yet how close they were to a breaking point, not an explosion, a collapse inward. A moment that would demand change, not through force, but through reckoning. And Evelyn quietly prepared herself to stand steady when it came. The turning point did not arrive with noise. It came quietly, the way exhaustion often does, after the body and spirit have both been stretched thin for too long. There was no single moment that announced itself as the beginning of change. No dramatic confession, no raised voices, just a slow, undeniable shift in the air inside the house. Marcus stopped leaving early. For 3 mornings in a row, Evelyn noticed his jacket still hanging by the door when she rose before dawn. His shoes remained neatly placed beneath the small bench in the hallway. The house stayed heavy with sleep long after sunrise, as if time itself had slowed. On the 4th morning, she found him sitting at the kitchen table before she reached it, elbows resting on the wood, head lowered. He had not turned on the light. The room was filled only with the pale gray of early morning. She paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of him there, still and unguarded in a way she had not seen in years. "Morning," she said softly. He looked up. His eyes were red, not from sleep, but from something deeper, something spent. "Morning," he replied, his voice flat. Evelyn moved through her routine without comment. She put on the kettle, took down 2 mugs, let the quiet remain unbroken. She understood instinctively that this was not a moment for questions. Marcus watched her hands as she moved, the way she always did things the same way. The steadiness of it seemed to ground him, though he did not know why. After a long moment, he spoke. "I lost the job." Evelyn did not react outwardly. No sharp intake of breath, no tightening of her mouth. She simply nodded. "I figured," she said gently. He blinked, surprised. "You did?" She met his eyes. "I could tell you were tired." He looked away, shame flickering briefly across his face. It wasn't just the job. Everything kinda fell apart. She carried the mugs to the table and sat across from him. "Do you want to tell me about it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not all of it." "That's all right," she said. "You don't owe me every detail." Marcus swallowed hard. He stared into the steam rising from his cup, his shoulders slowly sagging as if something inside him had finally given way. "I thought I could fix it," he said quietly. "Thought if I just pushed harder, stayed busy, didn't think too much, it'd straighten itself out." Evelyn listened. She did not interrupt. She did not offer reassurance yet. She let him find his own words. "But it didn't," he continued. "And now I don't really know what I'm doing anymore." The admission sat between them, heavy but honest. Evelyn felt the familiar ache rise in her chest, the ache of wanting to protect, to solve, to carry. She breathed through it. "I'm glad you told me," she said instead. Marcus let out a slow, shaky breath. "I didn't want to disappoint you." Her heart tightened. "You could never disappoint me by being honest," she said. He looked at her then. Really looked, as if searching her face for proof. Whatever he saw there softened something in him. His shoulders slumped further, the tension draining out in stages. "I messed up, Ma," he said. "I made choices I shouldn't have." Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand over his. This time she did not hesitate. "I know," she said, "and I still love you." The words were not dramatic. They were not loud. They were steady, anchored by years of living them. Marcus's eyes filled. He did not cry outright. He simply closed them for a moment, his jaw tightening as he fought to maintain control. Evelyn let him. She did not rush him through the moment. After a while, he spoke again. "I don't know how I ended up here." She squeezed his hand gently. "Most people don't." That morning changed something between them. Not everything. Not all at once. But the space between them shifted. Just enough for air to move through. Marcus stayed home that day. He slept for hours, the kind of sleep that came only after the body surrendered. Evelyn went about her day quietly, checking on him once, then leaving him alone. When he woke in the late afternoon, he found a plate of food waiting on the counter and a note written in Evelyn's careful handwriting. "Eat when you're ready. I'm in the garden." He ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if each bite grounded him a little more in the present. In the weeks that followed, Marcus remained home more consistently, not hiding, not withdrawing, but resting. The frenetic motion that had once driven him eased into something slower. He stopped pretending to be busy, stopped filling silence with noise. Evelyn noticed the change and met it with quiet consistency. She did not lecture him about plans, did not ask what he intended to do next. She trusted that the time would come when those questions would be useful. Instead, she offered structure without pressure, meals at regular times, a place at the table, a home that did not demand explanation. Marcus began helping more around the house, fixing small things, mowing the lawn, sitting with Evelyn in the evenings while she watched television, neither of them paying much attention to the screen. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the living room in soft gold, Marcus spoke again. "I used to think faith was about knowing things," he said quietly. "Like having answers." Evelyn turned slightly toward him. "A lot of people think that." "I don't," he said. "Not anymore." She waited. "I think it's about staying, even when you don't know what's next." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back. "That's a good way to put it," she said. He nodded. "You never gave up on me." She smiled gently. "I never thought about it that way." "How did you think about it?" "I just thought about being your mother," she said. The simplicity of the answer seemed to settle something in him. Marcus still struggled. Some days were heavier than others. Some mornings he woke with determination, others with doubt. Evelyn watched it all unfold without rushing him toward resolution. She understood now that this setback, losing the job, facing the collapse of his carefully maintained distractions, had created space. Painful space. Necessary space. The relationship between them shifted again, subtly but unmistakably. The distance that once felt defensive softened into vulnerability. Marcus did not suddenly become open or expressive, but he no longer hid entirely. One night, he sat at the kitchen table long after Evelyn had finished cleaning up. "Ma," he said. "Yes?" "I'm scared I won't figure it out." She considered carefully. "Most people are," she said. "Even the ones who look like they have." He nodded. "What if I never become who I was supposed to be?" She looked at him steadily. "You don't owe the world a version of yourself it imagined. imagined. You just owe yourself honesty." The words landed quietly but firmly. Marcus leaned back in his chair, absorbing them. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something close to peace settle into her chest. Not because everything was fixed, but because something real had begun. The house felt different now. Still quiet, still modest, but no longer strained by avoidance. The silence between mother and son carried less fear. Evelyn returned to her prayers each morning with a slightly lighter heart. She no longer asked for change to come quickly. She thanked God for movement, however small. Marcus began to feel the weight of her presence differently now. Not as expectation, not as pressure, but as something steady he could lean against when he grew tired. The turning point had passed. What lay ahead would take time, patience, humility, but for the first time in a long while, neither of them felt completely alone in it. Marcus did not change all at once. If anything, the days after his setback felt quieter than before. Stripped of urgency, stripped of performance, there was no longer anything to prove, no role to play. The energy that once drove him out of the house early and brought him back late had dissolved, leaving behind a stillness that was both unfamiliar and unsettling. At first, Marcus mistook that stillness for emptiness. He woke up some mornings with nowhere he had to be, and no one waiting for him to show up. The absence of pressure made his thoughts louder. Doubt crept in easily during those hours, filling the space where busyness had once lived. Evelyn noticed the restlessness, even as Marcus said little about it. She saw it in the way he lingered over his coffee, staring out the window long after it had gone cold, in the way he started chores and stopped halfway through, distracted by his own thoughts. She did not comment. Instead, she maintained the quiet rhythms of the house. Morning coffee, midday errands, evening meals eaten at the table. Her steadiness gave shape to the days, even when Marcus felt shapeless inside. One afternoon, as they folded laundry together in the living room, Marcus spoke without looking up. "I keep thinking about all the ways I messed up." Evelyn matched a pair of socks, carefully before responding. "That's normal." "It doesn't feel normal," he said. "Feels like I wasted time I can't get back." She nodded. "Regret does that," he exhaled slowly. "I thought if I ignored it long enough, it'd go away." "And did it?" He shook his head. "No." She glanced at him, her expression soft but serious. "Some things don't disappear just because we don't look at them." Marcus leaned back against the couch, rubbing his hands together. "I don't even know where to start fixing it." Evelyn placed the folded clothes aside and turned toward him fully. "You don't have to fix everything at once. That's what everyone says," he replied, a trace of frustration creeping into his voice. She smiled gently. "That's because it's usually true." He huffed out a quiet laugh, then grew serious again. "I feel like I let you down." The words landed, heavier than any admission he had made before. Evelyn reached for his hand. "Marcus," she said softly, "I didn't raise you so I could be proud of your success. I raised you so you'd know you were loved, even when you stumbled." He looked at her, his eyes searching. "You don't wish I was different?" She shook her head slowly. "I wish you were at peace." "That's not the same thing." Something shifted in him at that, a subtle loosening, as if a long-held belief had finally been questioned. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began to talk more. Not all at once, not in long speeches or emotional outbursts, just small disclosures scattered across ordinary moments. While washing dishes together, he mentioned friends he'd trusted who hadn't been trustworthy. While walking around the block in the evenings, he admitted to feeling out of place among people who seemed to know where they were going. While sitting at the table late at night, he spoke about the pressure he felt to measure up to something he could not name. Evelyn listened more than she spoke. She resisted the urge to offer advice unless he asked for it. She did not frame his experiences as lessons or warnings. She simply acknowledged them. "That sounds hard. I can see why that." Or, "You did the best you could with what you knew." Then, her responses were simple, but they landed deeply. Marcus had grown used to either being criticized or ignored. Being heard without judgment was new territory. One evening, he spoke about his father. "I still think about him a lot," Marcus said quietly as they sat on the porch, watching the sky darken. Evelyn nodded. "Me too. I feel like I let him down," Marcus admitted, "like he expected more from me." Evelyn considered this carefully. "Your father expected you to be honest, to be kind, to keep going even when things got hard." Marcus frowned slightly. "You really think that would have been enough for him?" "I know it would have," she said. "He knew life didn't come with guarantees." Marcus was quiet for a long time after that. The more Marcus opened up, the more Evelyn became aware of how much he had been carrying alone. His failures had not been reckless or cruel. They had been human, the result of confusion, grief, and a desire to escape feeling stuck. She felt grief of her own then, not regret, but sadness for the years they had lived side by side without truly reaching each other. But she did not dwell on it. Dwelling, she knew, could turn backward-looking pain into paralysis. Instead, she focused on what was unfolding now. Marcus began to change his routines slowly. He started waking earlier again, not out of panic, but intention. He took walks in the mornings, read books he'd once ignored, helped Evelyn in the garden, learning again the patience required to tend to something living. Working with the soil seemed to calm him, the physicality of it, the clear cause and effect. "Plant, water, wait. It's strange," he said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I always thought faith was about believing something hard." Evelyn smiled faintly. "What do you think it is now?" "I think it's about waiting without giving up," he said. She nodded. "That's a big part of it." Marcus began to see his mother's faith differently. Before, it had felt like a quiet pressure he could never live up to, a standard he feared disappointing. Now he saw it as endurance, as the ability to remain open when closing off would be easier. He noticed how she accepted each day as it came, how she did not rush happiness or resist sadness, how she trusted that meaning could exist even in seasons that felt unproductive. One night, Marcus Marcus sat at the kitchen table after Evelyn had gone to bed. He stared at the familiar room, the small scratches on the table, the worn edges of the chairs. He realized how much stability this space had provided, even when he had not appreciated it. He felt something close to gratitude settle into his chest. The next morning, he told Evelyn he wanted to look for work again. Not just anything, he said, something steady. Even if it's small. She smiled, not with excitement, but with calm affirmation. That sounds like a good place to start. She did not praise him excessively. She did not celebrate prematurely. She trusted the sincerity of the step without attaching expectations to it. Marcus sent out applications slowly, thoughtfully. He prepared himself for rejection. He accepted uncertainty. The process itself felt different this time, less desperate, more grounded. There were days when doubt returned, days when Marcus questioned whether he was capable of change. On those days, Evelyn remained consistent. She did not rush to reassure him. She simply reminded him that setbacks did not erase progress. The house continued to hold them both. Faith, Evelyn realized, had not changed Marcus directly. It had created space. Space for honesty, space for rest, space for rebuilding something truer than what had come before. The healing between them was quiet and ongoing. Not a straight line, not dramatic, but real. Marcus was not fixed. Evelyn did not expect him to be. What mattered was that he no longer ran from himself, and that she no longer tried to carry his future in place of him. Together, they were learning what it meant to move forward slowly, without illusion, supported by patience rather than pressure. The changes Marcus made were small enough that most people would not have noticed them. There was no announcement, no clear moment when things officially became different. If someone had asked Evelyn how her son was doing, she might have paused before answering, not because she lacked words, but because improvement no longer felt like something that needed to be explained. It showed itself quietly. Marcus began waking with the sun more often than not. He made his bed, not perfectly, but deliberately. He brewed his own coffee and sat at the table with Evelyn in the mornings, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply sharing the silence. The frantic edge that once clung to him had softened. He moved with less urgency, less defensiveness. He found work at a small hardware store on the edge of town. The hours were steady, the pay modest. The job did not impress anyone. That was part of why it worked. Evelyn did not congratulate him loudly when he told her. She nodded and said, "That sounds stable," and meant it as the highest form of praise. Marcus understood that. He felt seen, not measured. He came home tired now, but it was a different kind of tired. His body carried the weight of honest effort rather than restless avoidance. He showered, ate dinner, and sat in the living room with Evelyn in the evenings, sometimes watching television, sometimes just listening to the quiet hum of the house settling for the night. Their conversations grew easier, not deeper in the dramatic sense, but more natural. Marcus talked about customers at work, about the older man who trained him patiently, about learning things he hadn't expected to care about. Evelyn shared stories from church, from neighbors, from memories she no longer guarded as carefully as before. They laughed occasionally, soft laughter, the kind that rose unexpectedly and faded gently, leaving warmth behind. Silence, once tense, became companionable. Sometimes they sat on the porch together at dusk, watching the neighborhood move at its familiar pace. Marcus noticed things he hadn't before, how people waved even when they didn't stop, how evenings carried a sense of permission to rest. "I used to think this place was holding me back," he said once. Evelyn did not respond immediately. "Now?" she asked. "Now I think I just didn't know how to be still here," she nodded. "Stillness takes practice." Marcus absorbed that quietly. Evelyn continued to support him the way she always had, without ceremony, without expectation. She packed leftovers for his lunches, washed his work clothes, asked about his day without pressing for emotion. She did not boast about him to anyone, did not frame his progress as redemption or success. She treated it as something fragile and ongoing, deserving of protection rather than attention. Marcus noticed that too. It allowed him to grow without the fear of falling from a pedestal he had never wanted to stand on. There were setbacks. Some mornings Marcus woke with old doubts pressing in. Some evenings he returned home frustrated, discouraged by a difficult customer or a long day that left him questioning whether this small life was enough. On those days, Evelyn did not rush to reassure him. She listened. Sometimes she said, "That sounds exhausting." Sometimes she said nothing at all. Her presence did not erase his frustration, but it kept it from hardening into despair. Marcus began to understand humility in a new way, not as defeat, but as honesty. He stopped measuring himself against imagined timelines and other people's milestones. He focused instead on what was directly in front of him: work, home, health, trust. He began setting small goals, saving a little money, taking responsibility for his schedule, showing up even when motivation faltered. None of it felt heroic. That too was part of the lesson. One evening, as Evelyn folded laundry beside him, Marcus said, "I used to think you were just waiting for me to turn into someone else." Evelyn paused. "What do you think now?" "I think you were just waiting with me," he said. Her hand stilled for a moment. She looked at him, her eyes softening. "That's all I ever knew how to do." The bond between them deepened not through words, but through shared understanding. They had both changed. Evelyn no longer watched Marcus with the quiet panic she once carried. She trusted him to make choices, even imperfect ones. She accepted that his life might never look the way she once once imagined, and that this did not mean it lacked meaning. Marcus, in turn, stopped interpreting her silence as disappointment. He recognized it now as respect, as faith. He saw how she lived, not chasing happiness, not resisting sorrow, but receiving each day with steady grace. He understood that her strength had never been about control. It had been about endurance. One night, Marcus stayed up late, reading at the kitchen table while Evelyn slept. The house felt settled, familiar. He realized that this place, which he once viewed as temporary, had been anchoring him all along. The realization did not make him complacent. It made him careful. He did not promise himself grand change. He promised consistency. Weeks turned into months. Marcus remained at the hardware store. He grew more confident in his role. He learned names, took pride in doing things correctly. The simplicity of the work grounded him in ways ambition never had. Evelyn noticed the steadiness in him and let herself relax into it. She spent more time in her garden, less time worrying. Her prayers shifted again, no longer focused on Marcus's direction, but on gratitude. Thank you for patience. Thank you for time. Thank you for what is enough. They did not speak about the past often. When they did, it was without blame. One afternoon, Marcus said quietly, "I'm sorry I worried you." Evelyn smiled. "Worry is part of the job." He shook his head. Still, she reached over and squeezed his hand. "I'm glad you're here." The words carried weight, not urgency. They both understood that growth did not erase vulnerability. That stability was not a destination, but a practice. The house remained quiet. The neighborhood unchanged. Life continued without spectacle. And in that ordinary rhythm, mother and son found something deeper than resolution. They found understanding. Time passed in the way it always did, quietly, without asking permission. The seasons changed around the Carter house with little ceremony. Summer softened into fall. Leaves gathered along the edges of the yard, curling inward as if preparing for rest. The air grew cooler, slower, more forgiving. Marcus noticed the change in himself the way one noticed healing in a bruise, not all at once, but in the absence of pain that used to be constant. He was still careful with his days, still deliberate. He had not become fearless or entirely confident. Doubt still visited, sometimes unexpectedly, but it no longer stayed long enough to take root. The hardware store remained steady. Marcus worked his shifts, learned more than he thought he would, earned quiet respect from co-workers who valued reliability over ambition. He saved money slowly, not for anything grand, just to know he could. He began talking, casually at first, about finding his own place again. Not urgently, not as an escape, just as the next step. Evelyn listened without reaction. She nodded when he spoke, asked gentle questions when appropriate. She did not cling to the idea of him staying, nor did she push him to go. She had learned something essential over the years. Love did not require holding on forever. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Marcus mentioned a small apartment he had seen near the edge of town. Modest, quiet, affordable. "I'm not rushing," he said quickly. "Just thinking." Evelyn smiled softly. "Thinking is good." He studied her face. "You okay with it?" She met his gaze steadily. "I raised you to have your own life," she said. "That doesn't change just because it took longer than we thought." He nodded, relieved. The move did not happen right away. Weeks passed, then months. When it did happen, it was quiet. A few boxes, a borrowed truck, no speeches. Evelyn helped him pack, folding his clothes the same way she always had, careful not to linger too long over anything. She walked through the empty room afterward, pausing briefly in the doorway, then turning away without ceremony. Marcus hugged her before leaving. The embrace was steady, unhurried. "I'll still come by," he said. "I know," she replied. Life adjusted itself again. Evelyn returned to her routines without drama. The house felt different, not lonely, but spacious. She slept a little later, took longer walks, spent more time sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the light change. Marcus visited often. Sunday dinners became tradition, not obligation. He called her sometimes just to check in, sometimes just to listen. Their relationship had settled into something honest and durable. They no longer needed to talk about the past to understand it. They had lived through it together, each in their own way. One afternoon, months later, Evelyn sat alone at the kitchen table, her Bible open but unread. Sunlight spilled across the familiar surface, illuminating the small scratches and worn edges that marked a life fully used. She thought about motherhood, about how she had once believed that loving a child meant guiding them firmly toward a specific future, how she had slowly learned that love was less about direction and more about presence. She thought about faith, not the kind that demanded certainty or proof, but the kind that stayed quiet when answers delayed, the kind that trusted growth even when it happened out of sight. Marcus arrived later that evening, carrying groceries. He moved easily through the house now, comfortable but not dependent. He set the bags down and joined her at the table. "You look peaceful," he said. She smiled. "I feel it." They sat together in silence for a while, the kind that no longer asked anything of either of them. "I used to think my life had to look a certain way to mean something," Marcus said eventually. "Now I think meaning comes from how you stay, not how fast you move." Evelyn nodded. "That's a hard lesson to learn any other way." He glanced at her. "You knew that all along, didn't you?" She considered. "I learned it the same way you did," she said. "By living." The night deepened outside. The house settled around them, familiar and forgiving. Marcus stood to leave after a while. He paused at the door, turning back. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For waiting," he replied. "For believing when I couldn't." Evelyn met his eyes. "That's what mothers do," she said softly. We hold the light until you can see it yourself. He nodded once, then stepped out into the night. Evelyn closed the door gently behind him. She returned to the kitchen table and sat down, folding her hands loosely in front of her. Her life was not perfect. It never had been. But it was honest. It was full. She bowed her head slightly, not in request, but in gratitude, for patience, for time, for love that did not rush. Outside, the world continued its quiet turning. Inside, a mother's faith rested, not in outcomes, not in guarantees, but in the simple truth that love, when held gently, always finds its way.